He carried to his pets the parings of apples, turnips, potatoes, stray cabbage leaves, and carrots, and tied to the bushes meat bones, having scraps of fat and gristle. One morning, coming to his feeding ground unusually early, he found a gorgeous cardinal and a rabbit side by side sociably nibbling a cabbage leaf, and that instantly gave to him the idea of cracking nuts, from the store he had gathered from Duncan's children, for the squirrels, in the effort to add them to his family. Soon he had them coming, red, gray, and black. Then he became filled with a vast impatience that he did not know their names or habits. So the winter passed. Every week McLean rode to the Limberlost, never on the same day or at the same hour. Always he found Freckles at his work, faithful and brave, no matter how severe the weather. The boy's earnings constituted his first money, and when the boss explained to him that he could leave them safe at a bank and carry away a scrap of paper that represented the amount, he went straight on every pay day and made his deposit, keeping out barely what was necessary for his board and clothing. What he wanted to do with his money he did not know, but it gave him a sense of freedom and power to feel it was there. It was his, and he could have it when he chose. In imitation of McLean, he bought a small pocket account book in which he carefully set down every dollar he earned and every penny he spent. As his expenses were small and the boss paid him generously, it was astonishing how his little hoard grew. That winter held the first hours of real happiness in Freckles' life. He was free. He was doing a man's work faithfully through every rigor of rain, snow, and blizzard. He was gathering a wonderful strength of body, paying his way, and saving money. Every man of the gang and of that locality knew that he was under the protection of McLean, who was a power. This had the effect of smoothing Freckles' path in many directions. Mrs. Duncan showed him that individual kindness for which his hungry heart was longing. She had a hot drink ready for him when he came from a freezing day on the trail. She knit him a heavy mitten for his left hand, and devised a way to sew and pad the right sleeve that protected the maimed arm in bitter weather. She patched his clothing, frequently torn by the wire, and saved kitchen scraps for his birds, not because she either knew or cared anything about them, but because she herself was close enough to the swamp to be touched by its utter loneliness. When Duncan laughed at her for this, she retorted, "My God, Manny, if Freckles had not the birds and the beast, he would be always alone. It was never meant for a human being to be so solitary. He'd get touched in the head if he had not them to think for and to talk to." "How much answer do you think he gets to his talking, lass?" laughed Duncan. "He gets the answer that keeps the eye bright, the heart happy, and the feet walking faithful through the rough path he's set them in," answered Mrs. Duncan earnestly. Duncan walked away appearing very thoughtful. The next morning he gave an ear from the corn he was shelling for his chickens to Freckles, and told him to carry it to his wild chickens in the Limberlost. Freckles laughed delightedly. "Me chickens!" he said. "Why didn't I ever think of that before? Of course they are! They are just little, brightly colored cocks and hens. But wild is no good. What would you say to me wild chickens being a good deal tamer than yours here in your yard?" "Hoot, lad!" cried Duncan. "Make yours light on your head and eat out of your hands and pockets," challenged Freckles. "Go and tell your fairy tales to the wee people. They're just brash on believing things," said Duncan. "Ye cannot invent any story too big to stop them from calling for a bigger." "I dare you to come see," retorted Freckles. "Take ye," said Duncan. "If you make just and bird light on your head or eat frae your hand, ye are free to help yourself to my corn crib and wheat bin the rest of the winter." Freckles sprang in air and howled in glee. "Oh, Duncan, you're too easy!" he cried. "When will you come?" "I'll come next Sabbath," said Duncan, "and I'll believe the birds of the Limberlost are tame as barnyard fowl when I see it, and no sooner." After that Freckles always spoke of the birds as his chickens, and the Duncans followed his example. The very next Sabbath Duncan, with his wife and children, followed Freckles to the swamp. They saw a sight so wonderful it would keep them talking all the remainder of their lives, and make them unfailing friends of all the birds. Freckles' chickens were awaiting him at the edge of the clearing. They cut the frosty air around his head into curves and circles of crimson, blue, and black. They chased each other from Freckles, and swept so closely themselves that they brushed him with their outspread wings. At their feeding ground, Freckles set down his old pail of scraps and swept the snow from a small level space with a broom improvised of twigs. As soon as his back was turned, the birds clustered over the food, snatching scraps to carry to the nearest bushes. Several of the boldest, a big crow and a couple of jays, settled on the rim and feasted at leisure, while a cardinal, that hesitated to venture, fumed and scolded from a twig overhead. Then Freckles scattered his store. At once the ground resembled the spread mantle of Montezuma, except that his mass of gaily colored feathers was on the banks of living birds. While they feasted, Duncan gripped his wife's arm and stared in astonishment, for from the bushes and dry grass, with gentle cheeping and queer throaty chatter, as if to encourage each other, came flocks of quail. Before anyone saw it arrive, a big gray rabbit sat in the midst of the feast, contentedly gnawing a cabbage leaf. "Well, I be drawed on," came Mrs. Duncan's tense whisper. "Sh! Sh!" cautioned Duncan. Lastly Freckles removed his cap. He began filling it with handfuls of wheat from his pockets. In a swarm, the grain eaters arose around him as a flock of tame pigeons. They perched on his arms and the cap, and in the stress of hunger, forgetting all caution, a brilliant cock cardinal and an equally gaudy jay fought for a perching place on his head. "Weel, I'm beat," muttered Duncan, forgetting the silence imposed on his wife. "I'll have to give in. Seeing is believing. A man would 'a' had to see that to believe it. We mauna let the boss miss that sight, for it's a chance will na likely come twice in a life. Everything is snowed under, and the creatures near starved, but trust in Freckles that complete. They are tamer than our chickens. Look hard, bairns," he whispered. "Ye winna see the like o' yon again, while God lets ye live. Notice their colour against the ice and snow, and the pretty skipping ways of them, and spunky. Well, I'm hit fair." Freckles emptied his cap, turned his pockets, and scattered his last grain. Then he waved his watching friends good-bye and started down the timber line. A week later Duncan and Freckles arose from breakfast to face the bitterest morning of the winter. When Freckles, warmly capped and gloved, stepped into the corner of the kitchen for his scrap pail, he found a big pan of steaming boiled wheat on the top of it. He wheeled to Mrs. Duncan with a shining face. "Were you fixing this warm food for me chickens or yours?" he asked. "It's for yours, Freckles," she said. "I was afeared this cold weather they would not lay good without a warm bite now and then." Duncan laughed as he stepped to the other room for his pipe, but Freckles faced Mrs. Duncan with a trace of every pang of starved mother hunger he ever had suffered written largely on his homely, splotched, narrowed features. "Oh, how I wish you were my mother!" he cried. Mrs. Duncan attempted an echo of her husband's laugh. "Lord love the lad!" she exclaimed. "Why, Freckles, are you not bright enough to learn without being taught by a woman that I am your mither? If a great man like yourself dinna ken that, learn it now, and ne'er forget it. Ance a woman is the wife of any man, she becomes wife to all men for having had the wifely experience she kens. Ance a man child has beaten his way to life under the heart of a woman, she is mither to all men, for the hearts of mithers are everywhere the same. Bless ye, laddie, I am your mither." She tucked the coarse scarf she had knit for him closer over his chest and pulled his cap lower over his ears, but Freckles, whipping it off and holding it under his arm, caught her rough, reddened hand and pressed it to his lips in a long kiss. Then he hurried away to hide the happy, embarrassing tears that were coming straight from his swelling heart. Mrs. Duncan, sobbing unrestrainedly, swept into the adjoining room and threw herself into Duncan's arms. "Oh, the puir lad!" she wailed. "Oh, the puir mither hungry lad! He breaks my heart!" Duncan's arms closed convulsively around his wife. With a big, brown hand he lovingly stroked her rough sorrel hair.